I woke up to silence, the kind of silence that hums in your ears and makes your heart race because you just know something is off. Sunlight leaked through the curtains, the house was unusually still, and for a second I thought maybe everyone had just stepped out to run errands. But then I noticed no shoes by the door, no half-drunk coffee mug on the counter, no sound of Mark's morning news playing on full volume like it always did. I called out, "Mom," nothing. "Tyler," "Jake." My stepbrothers always made a mess in the kitchen by this hour, arguing about cereal, but now nothing. I checked every room, empty. Their closets, half-packed. The guest room, blankets gone. The car, not in the driveway. Then my phone buzzed. A single message from Mom. "Gone for a short trip. Please keep an eye on the house. Back in a week. Love you." I blinked at the screen. A trip? No warning? No conversation, just gone. They left me. I wasn't a kid anymore, 16, but still, I was part of this family too, right? Or at least I thought I was. I called her, she picked up, her voice was breezy. "Sweetie, it's just a little road trip, don't make a big deal." A big deal? You left without even saying goodbye. What if something had happened to me? "You're overreacting. You're practically an adult." And then she hung up. I stared at my phone, trying to make sense of everything. My heart pounded, but not from fear, from betrayal. I packed a bag, locked the front door, and slipped the house key under the flower pot like Mom always did. Then I went straight to my dad's. I didn't care if they thought I was being dramatic. I was done being invisible. But that was only the beginning. 3 days later, I got a call, not from Mom, not to ask if I was okay, but to scream at me. The house had been broken into, the TV is gone, jewelry is gone, Mark's expensive watch collection is gone. And guess who they blamed? Me. Mark, the man who hadn't said a single word to me in 2 years, finally opened his mouth to say one sentence. I always knew that boy would destroy this family. That's when it hit me. They never saw me as part of their family. I was just a placeholder, a problem, a burden. And they were about to find out what happened when the problem stopped staying silent. My name's Jason Miller. I'm 16 years old, and up until last summer, I believed I was just a regular kid trying to survive high school and teenage drama. I liked drawing, watching old superhero movies with my dad, and editing videos for fun. I didn't think I was the type of guy people remembered, just someone who kept his head down and didn't make waves. But looking back now, I realized that I wasn't invisible by nature. I was made invisible. I grew up bouncing between two houses, my mom's and my dad's. They were never married. I was born after what they both described as a complicated summer fling. It didn't last, but they agreed to co-parent me equally, so I spent alternating months with each of them, 1 month with dad, 1 month with mom. Repeat, every month I packed a bag and pretended this kind of life was normal. Surprisingly, it worked, at least in the beginning. My dad, Greg, was the rock. He was the quiet, dependable kind, an IT specialist by day and a jazz vinyl collector by night. He always made time for me, whether it was going on hikes, helping with homework, or just listening to me rant about school drama. We weren't flashy, but we were solid. Mom, on the other hand, was a firecracker. Linda had energy for days. She was a real estate agent, always dressed to impress, phone glued to her ear, multitasking like a champ. She laughed loudly, drove too fast, and said things like, "Don't sweat the small stuff," every time something went wrong. And me, I was the bridge between them, the only thing they had in common. I used to think they stayed in the same city all these years just to keep things easy, but when I got older, I found out the truth. They both had turned down jobs, better pay, more growth. Just so I wouldn't have to fly back and forth, they stayed close to me. That realization hit hard. I felt grateful. I felt like I mattered. Until Mark came into the picture. Mark Davis, my mom's new boyfriend, was smooth, polished, the kind of guy who wore pressed shirts even on weekends. I met him when I was 13. Mom brought him over for dinner, and I could tell she was smitten. He shook my hand firmly and called me young man like he was a politician running for office. At first, he was nice, asked me about school, said my comic sketches were impressive for my age. But slowly, the warmth disappeared. Without warning, he just stopped engaging. He never got angry, never yelled, but he froze me out completely. It was like someone had flipped a switch. One day we were talking about Marvel movies, and the next, he walked past me like I was furniture. When I asked Mom about it, she brushed it off. He's not used to teenagers, she said. Give him time. I tried. I was raised to be respectful, even when I wasn't being respected. I said hi every morning. I stayed polite. I stayed small. Then came the marriage. 1 year after dating, Mark proposed. They got married in a courthouse ceremony. I wore a button-up shirt I hated, stood quietly in the back, and smiled in all the photos because that's what was expected. And after the wedding, he moved in with his 2 sons. Tyler was 15, Jake was 12. Their mom had passed away a few years earlier, and they were polite enough, but just like their dad, they kept their distance. We weren't brothers. We weren't even roommates. We were strangers under the same roof. Tried connecting with them, tried talking about video games, sports, whatever, but it was clear they'd been told to avoid me. And they listened. Soon I realized something chilling. It wasn't just awkwardness, it was intentional. Mark didn't want me around, and he didn't want his kids getting close to me either. When I confronted Mom, she got defensive. Jason, it's complicated. Then explain it. He's going through his stuff. He's doing the best he can. What about me? I asked. Am I supposed to just take this? She went quiet. Then came her signature line. I've made so many sacrifices for you. The least you can do is try to make this work. It wasn't the first time she said that. It never got easier to hear. I wanted to yell that I didn't ask her to make those sacrifices. I wanted to remind her that being a parent wasn't a favor, it was a choice. But I bit my tongue because deep down, I didn't want to hurt her. I still believed she loved me. I still wanted her approval, her affection, her protection, but it never came. Month after month, I'd show up to her house, brace myself for 2 weeks of silence and isolation, then exhale relief when I returned to Dad's. It was a cycle of quiet suffering. The house became a war zone of avoidance. I had my corner, my habits. I avoided the living room when they watched TV, ate my meals in my room, turned my music low enough not to bother anyone. I became a ghost by design. One night, I walked into the kitchen and found them all eating pizza. I wasn't invited. I hadn't even known they ordered in. Sorry, Mom said with a shrug. We thought you were out. I wasn't. I was upstairs. They just didn't think to knock. That night, I lay awake and stared at the ceiling. I wasn't angry anymore, just numb. I used to love storytelling. I had a small YouTube channel where I'd post short sketches, nothing fancy, just fun stuff with my friends. But after Mark moved in, I stopped. I didn't feel like I had stories worth telling anymore. Just silence, loneliness. I told myself it was temporary, that maybe it would change. But deep down, I knew I was slowly disappearing, and no one seemed to care. The first real crack came one rainy Saturday. I'd just gotten back from my dad's place and was unpacking when I heard laughter downstairs. Mark and his sons were setting up a movie marathon in the living room. Blankets, popcorn, the whole cozy setup. I walked down, hopeful for a second, thinking maybe this time they'd invite me. I stood by the stairs, watched them giggle over which movie to start with. I waited, not a single glance in my direction. I cleared my throat. Hey, what are you watching? Mark didn't even turn. Family night, he said flatly, like I'd just asked a dumb question. I looked at my mom. She smiled weakly, then turned back to the TV. That word, family, stung more than I expected. It told me exactly what I needed to know. I wasn't part of it. Later that night, I sat in my room with the door closed, listening to their laughter echo through the hallway like background noise in someone else's home. I wasn't angry, not yet, just confused. I kept thinking, what did I do wrong? I started noticing the little things even more. Mark had a habit of speaking around me. At dinner, if he needed the ketchup, he'd say, "Can someone pass that?" Even when it was right in front of me. When he and mom discussed house rules or schedules, I wasn't included. He treated me like a guest who overstayed his welcome. One afternoon, I caught Jake in my room snooping through my sketchbook. When I asked what he was doing, he smirked and said, "Dad says you draw weird stuff." He wanted to see if it was true. I was stunned. "Did he tell you to come in here?" Jake shrugged. "He said it's not your room anyway." I confronted mom immediately. Her response? "You're too sensitive, Jason. Jake's just a kid." No apology, no boundaries are set, just another excuse. The most humiliating moment came a week later. Mom threw a small barbecue for Mark's coworkers. She asked me to stay upstairs to give them space. I complied, thinking it was just a grown-up thing. But halfway through the evening, I came down to grab a drink and froze. There, in our backyard, was a giant family photo Mark had printed and framed for the party. Him, Mom, Tyler, Jake. I wasn't in it. I wasn't even mentioned. That night, something inside me shifted. I started questioning everything. Was Mom ashamed of me? Had she told Mark things about me that weren't true? Why did he hate me so much if we barely interacted? I tried talking to her again, calmly. "I feel like I don't belong here," I said. She looked tired, like she'd heard this before, and didn't have the energy to pretend. "Jason, not everything is about you. Maybe if you tried harder to fit in." "I've been trying for 3 years." She didn't answer. Then she hit me with the line that had become her shield. "I gave up so much for you, and now you're making this harder than it needs to be." I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I stayed quiet, numb. The breaking point came one summer morning. It was supposed to be a regular week at Mom's house. I'd gotten up late, expecting the usual cold breakfast and colder silence, but the house was empty. No cars, no sounds, no notes. I checked every room, gone. Panic kicked in for a second. Had something happened? Were they in trouble? I called Mom. She answered, laughing, like I was being ridiculous. "We're just on a little trip, Jason. Don't be dramatic." "You left me home alone?" "While you're on summer break, I figured you wouldn't mind. Just keep the place clean." "You didn't even tell me." "I didn't think you'd care." I hung up before I said something I'd regret. My hands were shaking, my chest burned. I wasn't sad, I wasn't hurt. I was done. We packed a bag, locked the house, and left the key under the potted plant like she always did. Then I texted her, "Going to Dad's, house is locked." No reply. It was only when I got to my dad's and told him everything that the real picture started to form. He was silent for a long time, then said, "You should have told me sooner." I nodded. I didn't want to cause trouble. He looked at me, eyes tired but firm. "You're not the trouble, son. You never were." I thought leaving the house would be the hardest part. Turns out it was just the beginning. The next 3 days at my dad's were quiet, but in a comforting way. We ate dinner together and watched old movies, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't have to pretend everything was okay. Then the call came. His mom, not to check if I'd eaten, not to ask why I left, but to scream, "Jason, the house got robbed." Her voice was sharp, frantic. The back door was pried open. The TV's gone, Mark's watch is gone, my jewelry gone. I froze. "What? Are you serious?" "Of course I'm serious. And where the hell were you?" "I told you I was going to Dad's. I even texted." "You left the house empty after I asked you to watch it?" I felt my chest tighten. "You didn't ask me, you told me, last minute. And you didn't even think to check if I was okay with that." She didn't care. She was already spiraling. "Do you even realize what you've done? You were supposed to be responsible." "I'm 16, Mom. You don't tell your kid the day of that you're taking off and expect him to play security guard?" Then the line went dead. I stood there, staring at my phone, shaking with adrenaline. My dad looked up from the kitchen and asked, "Everything all right?" "She's blaming me," I muttered. "For the break-in." He nodded slowly. "Let's talk." So I did. I told him everything about how Mark hadn't spoken to me in years, about how Tyler and Jake ignored me, about how Mom always said it was my fault, that if I tried harder, it would be different, and about how she'd left me, literally, with no warning. He listened quietly, then said, "She doesn't get to treat you like this anymore." That was the moment everything shifted. We contacted the police, who confirmed there was no sign of forced entry on the front door. They believed the intruders had come in from the back, exactly where Mom never fixed the broken lock. And I told them the truth. I hadn't been there. I'd left a message. I'd even hidden the key like Mom always did. There was no negligence on my part. Still, it didn't stop Mark. For the first time in years, he called me, not to apologize, not to check in, but to accuse me. "This is what I expected from you," he growled. "From the start, you don't care about this family. You've been a liability from day one." I laughed bitterly. "Funny, considering you've never spoken to me until now." "Because I saw right through you. You've always been a problem. Your mother tried to protect you, but I knew you'd be our downfall. It wasn't just cruel, it was personal, and I didn't even know why." A few days later, things took a turn I didn't expect. My mom emailed me. It wasn't a message of concern, it was a list of damages, estimated costs, and insurance problems. At the end, she wrote, "Your father should take responsibility if he insists you did nothing wrong." It was cold, businesslike, like I was some tenant who broke the lease. My dad saw the email. "That's enough," he said. "We're filing for full custody." I nodded, barely able to process it. "She'll fight back. She can try." But then, twist number 2 hit. Mark left her. Things unraveled fast. He found out something my mom never intended for anyone to hear, that the reason he'd hated me for years was based on her lies. She had told him early in their relationship that I'd always sabotaged her relationships, that I'd threatened one of her boyfriends once, that I hated his kids. I called his sick mother a burden and refused to let her move in. None of it was true. She had made me the scapegoat to avoid taking responsibility herself. She didn't want his mother moving in because she felt overwhelmed, and instead of saying that, she blamed me, told him I was the problem. He believed her for years, until now. He confronted her, she confessed, and then he walked. When I found out, I didn't feel satisfied. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt empty. She tried calling. I didn't answer. She tried texting. I blocked her. She sent a message to my aunt. "Tell him I never meant for it to go this far." Too late. Because now I saw it all. All those years I blamed myself, wondering what I'd done wrong, why no one in that house saw me. It wasn't me. It was her. She had rewritten the narrative so she wouldn't have to face her guilt, and she let me suffer in silence because it was easier. My dad stood by me through it all. He got me a therapist, encouraged me to restart my YouTube channel, helped me rebuild the pieces of my identity I'd almost forgotten. But healing doesn't come with apologies or revenge. It comes with truth. The truth was that my mother had chosen to protect her comfort over my well-being. And that's a betrayal you never fully recover from. There's a moment right before you break when the world goes silent, not the peaceful kind of silence, not the kind where you feel safe or still. This silence feels like falling, like you're screaming underwater, but no one hears. No one even knows you're drowning. That's where I was. After Mark left and the truth about Mom's lies came out, I expected something, maybe an apology or at least some sort of reckoning. What I got was nothing. Silence again. No texts, no calls, no knocks on the door. Just screenshots from my cousins showing Mom's social media. Sad quotes, cryptic posts, things like, Sometimes the ones you love the most hurt you the deepest. And a mother's love is taken for granted until she's gone. Yeah? She wasn't gone. She was just hiding from me, from the truth, from herself. At school, I couldn't focus. Every hallway felt like a reminder that I didn't belong somewhere. I stopped drawing, stopped filming, stopped laughing. I couldn't even fake a smile when my friends asked if I was okay. Because what was I supposed to say? My mom ruined my relationship with my stepfamily by lying about me, then blamed me for a robbery, and now plays the victim while I try not to fall apart? No one would believe that. Even therapy, which helped at first, started to feel like a place where I just rehashed the same questions. Why did she do it? Why didn't she protect me? Why didn't she stop him from treating me like a shadow? Why was I never enough? I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to hurt her back. I just wanted her to see me. But even that hope began to fade. My dad tried to be there for every bad day, every skipped meal, every sleepless night. He didn't ask me to forgive her. He didn't push me to move on. He just showed up quietly. But part of me resented that too, not because of him, but because he couldn't fix it. No one could. The night before our first court hearing for custody, I broke down. It was past midnight. I was in my room, surrounded by old sketchbooks, drawings of worlds I used to dream up, characters I used to care about. I picked one up, a drawing I made when I was 10. It was me, my mom, and my dad all holding hands, smiling, standing in front of a house that looked nothing like any we'd ever lived in. I stared at it for a long time, and then I ripped it in half, and for the first time in months, I sobbed. I cried so hard, my chest ached. I clutched my pillow, curled into myself like I was trying to disappear. Because that's what it felt like, that I had disappeared. The boy who wanted to be a storyteller, gone. The son who believed in second chances, gone. The teenager who thought love could survive anything, gone. All that was left was a hollow version of me, angry, exhausted, and afraid that maybe I'd never feel whole again. The next morning, I didn't want to get up. I didn't want to face court. I didn't want to speak to lawyers or judges or anyone. But my dad knocked on my door. He didn't push it open. He just stood there and said, "You don't have to say anything. You don't even have to look at her, but I want you to come with me, not because of her, because of you. You deserve a clean slate." I didn't answer, but I got dressed. In court, Mom looked different, smaller, paler. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but when they met mine, they didn't show regret, just desperation, like she wanted everything to go back to how it was, without doing any of the work. She cried when her lawyer read our texts, when the judge questioned her parenting choices, when Mark's statement was read aloud, his confession about the lies she told him, how he'd mistreated me based on those lies. She sobbed, but not for me, for herself. I didn't say much that day, just answered questions, told the truth. That was all I had left. The judge awarded full custody to my dad. When we walked out of that courtroom, I thought maybe I'd feel victorious, but all I felt was empty, because this wasn't a win. This was the aftermath of a war I never wanted. That night, I stared out the window of my new room at Dad's house. Same house I'd always known, but it felt different now. Wider, safer, but also lonelier. Because even though I was finally free, I'd lost something I couldn't get back. Not just a relationship, not just trust, but the version of me who believed that love, especially a mother's love, could survive anything. Healing doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or a big emotional speech. It starts quietly, with small choices, with showing up. That's how it happened for me. It began with my dad, the way he checked on me, not hovering, not pushing, just there. He never tried to distract me from the pain or tell me to look on the bright side. He just made space for it, for me. One night, about a month after the custody decision, he walked into my room holding a box. "I found this in the garage," he said. It was full of my old camera gear, tripods, lenses, SD cards I hadn't touched in over a year. "I thought maybe you'd want it back," he added before leaving me alone with it. At first, I just stared at the box. Then, almost without thinking, I picked up the camera. It was dusty, heavier than I remembered. That night, I filmed nothing important, just random clips, the steam from a cup of cocoa, my dad fixing something in the garage, the wind outside my window. But it felt like breathing again. I didn't post anything, not yet, but I kept filming, day by day, frame by frame. The world started to feel less heavy when I looked at it through a lens. Then one afternoon, something unexpected happened at school. Mrs. Carter, my media studies teacher, pulled me aside after class. "I saw one of your old videos on YouTube," she said. "The one with the pizza delivery superhero? It's hilarious." I laughed, surprised anyone still remembered that goofy skit. "You have a real eye for story," she said. "You ever thought of entering the Northwest Teen Film Festival?" I blinked. "That's for actual filmmakers." She raised an eyebrow, "And what are you?" That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it, so I went back and watched my old videos, the ones I used to make with my friends before everything went sideways. They weren't perfect, the lighting sucked, the audio cut out sometimes, but they were mine. They were full of heart. So I started writing again, not a skit, not a comedy, a short film about a boy who disappears in his own home and how he fights to be seen again. I poured everything into it, my pain, my confusion, my anger, my hope. I didn't try to make it pretty. I made it real. Dad helped with editing. Mrs. Carter gave feedback on the script, and my best friend Sam, who I drifted from during the worst of it, volunteered to act in it. "You don't have to explain everything," he said, handing me a can of soda. "I'm just glad you're back." It was the first time I felt whole, like maybe the broken parts of me weren't permanent. We shot the film in 2 weekends. It was raw, rough, but honest. When I submitted it to the festival, I didn't expect anything. But a month later, I got an email. "Finalist, screening April 14, Portland Community Theater." I stared at the screen, not believing it. I showed my dad, who smiled wider than I'd seen in years. "You earned this," he said. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." That night, I got a message on Instagram. It was from Mark. "I saw the trailer. I'm sorry for everything. I was wrong. You never deserved the way I treated you." I didn't reply, not because I was angry, but because I wasn't ready. Some wounds need time, not closure. A few days before the screening, I got another message. "Dear Mom, I heard about the film. I'd like to come just to support you. No pressure. I understand if you say no." I stared at the message for a long time, and then I muted the chat. Because here's the thing, healing isn't about giving people what they want. It's about giving yourself what you need. And I needed space. April 14th came. The theater was small but packed. When my name was called and the lights dimmed, I held my breath. The film played. 6 minutes, that's all it was. But in those 6 minutes, I told the truth. About silence, about invisibility, about being forgotten, and choosing to speak anyway. When the lights came back up, there was a beat of silence, then applause. People clapped, a few stood, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. After the film screening, everything started to shift. Not dramatically, not all at once, but like the first gust of wind before a storm clears the sky. That night when I got home, there were already a few messages waiting in my inbox. A college student from Seattle said my film reminded him of his own family. A teacher from another school asked if I'd be interested in speaking to her media class. I stared at the screen, stunned. All I did was tell the truth, my truth. And somehow that was enough. The next morning, Mrs. Carter pulled me aside again. "You've got something, Jason," she said, "something real. Don't let anyone dim that." I nodded, still trying to wrap my head around it all. Later that week, my video went live on the film festival's website. It got shared. A lot people commented things like, "I see myself in this, and thank you for putting this into words." I didn't expect what happened next. One of Mark's old coworkers saw the film. He recognized the story, recognized me. He forwarded to Mark, who'd already seen the trailer, but now watched the full version. That's when the second email came, longer this time. "Jason, I don't expect you to respond. I just want to say that after watching your film, I finally understand not just what you were going through, but what I let myself believe. I should have asked questions. I should have spoken to you directly. I failed you, and I'm truly sorry." It didn't feel like a victory, but it felt like the truth was finally catching up to the lies. Then came the biggest surprise of all. My mom reached out again, but this time she didn't ask for anything. No requests, no guilt, just one line. "I've been watching your film on repeat. I didn't know how deep the damage went. I thought I was protecting you, but I was protecting myself." And still, I didn't reply because this wasn't her story anymore. It was mine. And I was finally writing the ending myself. Instead of hiding, I leaned in. I started working on a new short. This one wasn't about pain. It was about healing, about finding your people after losing your foundation. I asked my old friends to help out, the same guys I'd drifted from when my life was falling apart. They showed up without hesitation. "You've always been the glue, man," Sam said. "We were just waiting for you to believe it." We shot in the city, in parks, and even in Dad's garage. We laughed so much during filming that my face hurt for days. And that joy, it was real, not performative, not forced, just mine. But the real turn came when my school principal called me into his office. "I saw your film, Jason. It's powerful. We'd like to feature it during our upcoming Mental Health Awareness Week. Would you be willing to speak afterward?" My first instinct was to say no. I wasn't a speaker. I wasn't even sure I was healed enough to tell this story out loud. But then I remembered something my therapist had said. Sometimes we don't speak because we're healed. We speak because we're healing. So I said yes. On the day of the event, I stood backstage, palms sweating, my heart pounded. What if I froze? What if no one cared? But when I walked out, the auditorium was full. Students, teachers. I looked out and saw faces I didn't expect, including my dad beaming from the third row. And just behind him, my mom. She looked smaller than I remembered, older, like she'd aged 5 years in the span of one. Her eyes were red. But she didn't cry. She just nodded and stepped up to the mic. And for the first time ever, I spoke as myself, no scripts, no filters. "I used to feel invisible," I began, "not because no one looked at me, but because the people who mattered most chose not to see." I told them about silence, about walking through a house where no one spoke your name, about feeling like you didn't belong in your own life. I didn't blame, I didn't attack. I just told the truth. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then the applause came, slow at first, then louder. Afterward, people came up to thank me. A girl said, "I thought I was the only one." A teacher said, "You gave us a language we didn't know we needed." Mom never approached me that day. She didn't try to hug me or corner me. She just watched from afar. And honestly, that was enough because this wasn't about her anymore. This was about reclaiming the space I'd once been pushed out of. My space, my voice, my story. And I wasn't done telling it. The real confrontation didn't come in a courtroom. It didn't come with yelling or door slamming or some dramatic showdown under flashing lights. It came quietly, unexpected, at a parent-student roundtable hosted by the school a few weeks later. The event was meant to foster honest conversation between teens and adults. Topics ranged from mental health to generational expectations. Since my film had started getting attention, the school asked me to sit on the panel. I said yes, reluctantly. What I didn't know was that my mom had signed up to attend. I saw her as soon as I walked in. She sat in the back, clutching a notebook like it could shield her. Her hair was tied up tight, face stiff. She didn't look like the mom I remembered. She looked like someone preparing for battle. The panel went smoothly until the Q&A. A woman raised her hand and said, "My son doesn't talk to me anymore. After your film, I realized I might have hurt him in ways I didn't mean. How do you repair something when it feels broken beyond fixing?" The moderator turned to me. I froze because I could feel my mom's eyes on me, burning, waiting, hoping. I took a breath. "I think the first step," I said slowly, "is accepting that your version of the story isn't the only one. That maybe you caused more harm than you're ready to admit. And maybe you won't get forgiveness, but you still have to take responsibility anyway." The room went quiet. I didn't look at her, I couldn't. But I saw her hands clench tighter around that notebook. After the panel, people came up to talk, to thank me, to share their own experiences. And then, after most had left, she approached. Her steps were hesitant, her voice low. "Jason." I looked at her, really looked. She wasn't wearing makeup, her eyes were raw, her voice cracked when she said, "I know I'm the villain in your story, and maybe I always will be, but I need you to know I believed my own lies for a long time until I didn't." Answer right away. She continued, "I told myself I was protecting you, that I was keeping things from Mark to make life easier, but the truth is, I was protecting me from the hard conversations, from the guilt, from facing what I'd done." He swallowed hard. "I've lost your trust, maybe for good, but I had to say this, not because I expect anything back, but because I finally see what I did. And I'm sorry." She reached into her bag and handed me something. It was the drawing, the one I'd ripped in half. She'd taped it back together. "I found it in a box I never unpacked," she whispered. "I kept telling myself I didn't need it, but I did." I held the paper gently, the tape lines still visible like scars. Then she stepped back and left. No hugs, no begging, no drama, just the truth. And in that moment, something in me exhaled. Because the real climax of this story wasn't about revenge or proving a point. It was about being seen fully, finally. Weeks later, the district invited me to screen my film at a countywide education summit. I agreed on one condition. I wanted to follow it up with a student-led panel, no adults speaking for us, just us. They said yes. That night, in a packed auditorium, the lights dimmed once again. My film played. People watched. Some cried. And when the panel began, I wasn't nervous because I wasn't alone. Around me were other teens who had stories too. A girl who'd survived foster care, a boy who came out and was disowned, a student who'd been homeless, living out of her car. We told our truths, not for applause, but for freedom. At the end of the night, as people filtered out, a teacher approached me. "You've done more for our students in 10 minutes than most adults manage in years," she said. I nodded, humbled, because the truth is, I wasn't trying to be anyone's hero. I was just done being invisible. And somehow, in choosing to speak, I'd helped others find their voice too. It's been 6 months since the film came out. I still live with my dad. Life's not perfect, but it's stable, peaceful, real. Sometimes I still think about her, about Mom. We haven't spoken since that night at the round table. She hasn't tried to reach out again, and I haven't reached out either. I don't hate her. That's the strange part. For a while, I thought I'd carry that anger forever, but it didn't grow. It shrank. Like a fire starved of oxygen. It didn't disappear, but it stopped controlling me. Forgiveness didn't come in a big dramatic moment. It came in the quiet, on walks, in therapy, in late night journaling, in laughter with friends, in rediscovering joy in the little things. And it came with one core truth. You can love someone and still choose to walk away. You can understand why they hurt you and still decide not to let them back in. But that's not cruelty, that's survival. People ask me if I'll ever speak to her again. I don't know, maybe one day, maybe never. What matters is I don't need it. I'm not waiting for closure. I am the closure. Because I rebuilt myself brick by brick, frame by frame, not to prove a point, but because I deserve peace. I still make films. They're not all heavy. Some are funny, some are weird, some are about raccoons stealing pizza or high schoolers trying to time travel, but all of them are mine. And people watch them, not because they're perfect, but because they're honest. Honesty is my superpower now. That and the ability to choose who I become, no matter where I came from. The other day, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Jake, my former stepbrother. It wasn't long, just a folded page written in messy handwriting. Hey, Jason, I don't know if you'll ever want to talk, but I'm sorry for how I acted. I thought you didn't like us, but now I know you were just alone. That wasn't fair. I hope you're doing okay. I stared at it for a while, then I smiled. Because sometimes life gives you closure in places you didn't expect. And sometimes the people you thought were just side characters in your story turn out to have their own arcs too. So here's what I've learned. You are not what people say about you behind closed doors. You are not defined by who accepts you or who d- and you are never, ever as invisible as you feel. You are seen. You are heard. You are enough. No matter how many times they try to convince you otherwise. That's the truth I carry now. And that's the story I'll keep telling. For me, for the kid I used to be, and for anyone who's ever had to fight just to exist in their own home. Because we are not burdens. We are not problems to be solved. We are stories waiting to be told. And finally, I'm telling mine.